Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical themes in Man City's 2-1 win at Arsenal. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on how both sides look to press. Then we'll shift to Arsenal's left-hand side and how they cause City problems. And lastly, we'll focus on the second half adjustments. So when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-2-3-1 and Man City starting in a 4-3-3. So first we'll focus on Arsenal's pressing. And what you could see in that midfield zone is that it is 3v3 with Odegaard sitting on Rodri. You have Xhaka and ThomasPartey stepping towards Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. So what you ended up seeing in terms of their pressing was that you had Lacazette stepping towards the center backs, and then you could have Odegaard stepping towards the spare man, but there were times where you ended up seeing Martinelli pushing towards Ruben Diaz with Lacazette sitting on Laporte, and then that leaves Cancelo free. In that situation, you'd end up seeing Xhaka shifting across to close him down, and then Thomas Partey would shift laterally to deal with Bernardo Silva. That ensures that Tierney could stick with Mahrez, and ultimately the biggest fear for Arsenal was that Kevin De Bruyne was free on the opposite side of the pitch. In those situations, you simply have the center backs covering, and you'd see Tomiyasu shifting out to Kevin De Bruyne if the ball was played into that zone, and that would force Ben White to shift over to deal with Raheem Sterling if Tomiyasu was bypassed. There were occasions where Odegaard did step out to close down Laporte, and from there he looked to block off the passing lane into Rodri, and that's where you'd see Xhaka or Thomas Partey stepping into the path of Rodri, and if it was Xhaka in particular, then you would see Martinelli shifting laterally to deal with Bernardo Silva. Arsenal were focused on closing down that left-hand side in particular due to the fact that it was Cancelo and Mahrez operating in that zone, whereas over on City's left-hand side, it was Ake and Sterling. So with Cancelo looking to push forward, the only real threat that Arsenal would experience down that flank was if Martinelli or Xhaka weren't tracking Cancelo, and there was one play in particular where you ended up seeing Cancelo running off both, and Mahrez dragging out Tierney and dropping off the ball into the path of Bernardo Silva, who then slid the ball beyond the left back to allow Cancelo to break forward. If Arsenal dropped off deeper into two banks of four, they'd have Rodri being closed down by Lacazette and Odegaard, and they'd press the center backs accordingly. City's attempt to bypass this Arsenal shape was by having Bernardo Silva dropping into an inside right position, and then have Cancelo push forward in a narrow inside right zone. But from there, we witnessed Xhaka picking up Cancelo, and then you'd see Martinelli and Lacazette shift over to close down Bernardo Silva. Frankly, Arsenal stuck to their roles well, and they were able to limit City's dominance in this game. And the only real times that they were bypassed was down to simple lapses, and even there you witness the Arsenal covering players halt the attack. If you look to another example, this time no one gets tight on Bernardo Silva, and he's able to split Martinelli and Lacazette for Rodri, who is now free because neither Odegaard or Lacazette were tight on him as well. He's able to slide the ball into the path of Cancelo, who's within close proximity, but as that play develops, it's Xhaka who gets across to halt the attack. Here we witness Rodri picking up the ball freely in his own half, and neither Lacazette or Odegaard are tight on him, and Bernardo Silva shifts in the gap between Thomas Partey and Xhaka. Rodri splits both Arsenal duos and plays the ball into Bernardo Silva, which pulls away Thomas Partey, and from there you can see that Kevin De Bruyne is free in that inside left position. Bernardo Silva is able to cut onto his left foot, and from there you can see that he takes both players out of the game and he slides the ball across Thomas Partey into the path of De Bruyne to run at the back four. From there, De Bruyne receives the ball freely, and this is where you need Ben White to step out to help with that pressure, as you also end up seeing Tomiyasu having to deal with Sterling. And as that play develops, De Bruyne ends up taking a heavy first touch, and from there, White's able to get across to halt the danger. The other alternative for Arsenal would be to play long balls over the City press to get Martinelli an instant 1v1s against Cancelo. If Bernardo Silva looked to push forward, what we often witnessed was that he was looking to make runs off of Xhaka into that gap between the center back and the fullback, and that was to combine with Mahrez, but there were times where Xhaka wasn't tracking those runs, but Arsenal were able to deal with that threat with Gabriel shifting over to provide cover. Outside of that, we witnessed Gabriel Jesus dropping off into the midfield zone looking to get on the ball. And out in those wider areas, Arsenal did a very good job of coping with Mahrez and Sterling, as Tierney had protection from Xhaka and Martinelli shifting across, and Tomiyasu coped with Sterling, and you had Thomas Partey shifting over for protection as well. Along with the fact that Saka could drop off a bit deeper, knowing that Nathan Ake doesn't offer much of a threat in that zone. City's press, on the other hand, was pretty straightforward. They pressed in a 4-4-2 shape, with Gabriel Jesus and De Bruyne stepping towards the center backs. You had Mahrez and Sterling closing closing down the fullbacks, and then Bernardo Silva and Rodri would look to squeeze on Xhaka and ThomasPartey. Therefore, if Odegaard and Lacazette dropped off deeper, that would require the center backs to track their movement to close them down. There were occasions where Rodri was in that central midfield zone, and when Lacazette or Odegaard did drop into that area, he was able to step in and win possession. But Arsenal found a hole in City's pressing over on the right-hand side, and it looked to be a clear tactic. They'd get the ball out to Tomiyasu to pull out Sterling, and then they'd slide the ball across Sterling into the path of Odegaard or Lacazette dropping off into that zone. When they would look to get the ball, there could be pressure from the center backs or Rodri. But if they were able to bypass that instant pressure, then they'd be looking to switch the ball out over to the left-hand side. If we look to an example of Arsenal bypassing the City press, we could see Lacazette dropping into his own half to drag out a center back, as Odegaard's also dropping off into his own half to pull away Ake. Ruben Diaz's pressure on Lacazette isn't tight, so that allows him to slide the ball across the center back into Saka, pulling out Laporte as Ake stepped into the path of Odegaard. As that play develops, Saka is able to run at Laporte, and you can see Lacazette making a run off Ruben Diaz into the final third. Saka is able to square the ball into the path of Lacazette, and from there he looks to slide the ball over on the left channel for Martinelli to run at Cancelo. And from there you witness Xhaka doing a very good job of making a forward run into left half space to pull away Bernardo Silva and Cancelo, and perhaps Martinelli should be squaring the ball into Lacazette or Odegaard calling for it, but from that position he bends an effort inches wide of the net. Over on the left-hand side, it was clear that Arsenal wanted Martinelli to attack Cancelo at every opportunity due to his defensive deficiencies, but in those attacks, you'd also see Tierney looking to take up adventurous positions to peg back Mahrez. The hope was that Mahrez wouldn't track those runs and Arsenal would have 2v1 in that zone, similar to what they did against Norwich. And here, this was a successful ploy as Martinelli caused Cancelo several problems, and you could look to several instances where Tierney got himself into advanced positions in the final third, beyond Mahrez, and that ultimately led to Arsenal's opening goal. Here's another example of Arsenal breaking freely through Thomas Partey's individual brilliance, and he ends up sliding the ball across Cancelo, who's tucked in a bit too narrow, and it allows Martinelli to take his first touch across Cancelo, who again is poorly positioned, and from there he breaks free into the penalty area, but he's unable to beat Ederson from point blank range. Here you see Ramsdale bypassing the City press, and he plays a long ball over the top to place Martinelli in a 1v1 against Cancelo. As that play develops, he carries the ball towards the edge of the box and he takes two City defenders with him, and from there he looks to pull the ball back into the path of Odegaard and Lacazette. When he plays the ball into Lacazette, now you can see that Saka's taking away Ake and Odegaard's making a free run off Bernardo Silva in towards the penalty area. As that play develops, what ends up happening is that Odegaard takes his first touch across Ake, who's poorly positioned, but from there Ederson's off his line and he's able to halt Odegaard from getting a shot on goal. If we focus on the build up to the goal, you can see that De Bruyne and Rodri are taken out of the game by ThomasPartey, and Xhaka's now able to slide the ball into Odegaard free between the lines as neither of the center backs step, but also focus on Mahrez, who looked to shift over to close down for his teammates. And because he moves into that halfway circle, now you can see that Tierney's free on that left-hand side. As the play develops, Odegaard ends up sliding the ball out into the wider area for Tierney, and what you end up seeing is that Tierney receives the ball in this position. Now you need all of the City players to shift across and Mahrez and Rodri to close him down, but Tierney's able to carry the ball all the way into the final third, and by the time Rodri does shift across, you can see that Odegaard's making a run off Bernardo Silva and Rodri calling for it, but on that right-hand side, you have Lacazette and Saka occupying Ake and Laporte. Tierney ends up splitting Rodri and Diaz to find Saka in right a half space, and because Lacazette does a very good job of backing into Ake, it frees up space for Saka to sweep in a first-time effort. Therefore, when you look to the second half, Arsenal did lose the game down to defensive errors. It was simply their inability to clear lines, and what you ended up seeing was that for the first goal, it's a simple ball around Tierney and Xhaka does well to track the movement, and this is a good Arsenal defensive recovery, but his inability to deal with Bernardo Silva in the 1v1 led to the penalty. Whereas the build up to the last minute winner from Rodri witnessed Rodri making a forward run from that midfield zone, and when you look at that play specifically, you see that ThomasPartey isn't tracking that run, and Holding does a very good job of following it. But what ends up happening there is that Holding fails to deal with that initial header, and that places City in the position to get the shot that was blocked off into the path of Rodri. In terms of a tactical shift, Arsenal fell down to 10 men early on in that second half, and what we ended up witnessing from Pep Guardiola is that he brought on Gundogan for Gabriel Jesus, and he pushed Bernardo Silva into the center forward role. What we ended up seeing from City here was now they shifted into more of a 2-3-5 with the center backs in a central position. They had Cancelo and Ake in those inside right and left positions aligned with Rodri, and we witnessed some variation from Cancelo and Mahrez where there were times where Mahrez did look to pick up the ball in deeper positions to have Cancelo go 1v1 with Tierney rather than solely having him hugging the touchline. Meanwhile, when you look to the shuttlers, it was Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne pushing into advanced positions. De Bruyne was often occupying Tierney, and there were times where he would look to drift laterally and make those runs into the gap between the center back and the fullback, whereas Gundogan was pushed into that advanced position in between Tomiyasu and White. Initially, City shifted into a 4-4-1 after they brought on Rob Holding following Gabriel's dismissal, and this forced Arsenal to shift into more of a 5-3-1. You ended up having Xhaka dropping off into that left center back role, so now Arsenal can make up the numbers and be 5v5 along their defensive line. The other reason why Arsenal shifted into that 5-3-1 is so they could have White and Xhaka make those recovering runs when City looked to get the ball out wide and played in behind the fullbacks for the movement of Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne. Yet, even being down to 10 men, Arsenal still had chances to secure points in this game as Martinelli scuffed an opportunity in the penalty area, and Saka was played in free by Ben White but failed to hold off Ake and help from Laporte. So as you can see, despite a positive first half display from Arsenal built around their left side threat, individual mistakes from the hosts ultimately resulted in the league leaders claiming all 3 points.